There are moments when the universe seems to stop spinning, holding its breath just before a catastrophic collision of pride and consequence. This is the story of Agent Karen Reynolds, a gate agent who thought her uniform gave her the final word, and Mr. David Sterling, a man whose composure masked the weight of a $3 billion corporation. At Gate A4 of Phoenix Sky Harbor, Karen decided a man in a tailored suit didn't look like he belonged in first class. She refused to scan his pass. What she didn't know was that the men walking toward her, the men she was preparing to grovel for, were the very board of directors who had just voted Mr. Sterling their new chief strategy officer. The line for the plane was about to become the line for her unemployment. The clock above Gate A4 at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport showed 10:45 a.m. The flight, Phoenix to New York, JFK, Flight 577, Aegis Airlines, was slated for a priority boarding call in precisely 5 minutes. The gate was a bottleneck of stressed financiers, weary travelers, and a handful of genuine jet-setters. Presiding over this momentary kingdom was Agent Karen Reynolds. Karen was a creature of habit and procedure, a woman whose 15 years on the job had hardened her demeanor into a permanent mask of weary authority. Her dark blue uniform was immaculate. Her silver name badge, and polished to a mirror sheen, was pinned precisely over her heart. She lived for the small, transactional power of her position. She decided who boarded first, who waited, and, on a slow day, who was going to have a bad afternoon. Karen was currently running her finger down the final page of the pre-flight manifest, a task that required no real focus, but lent her an air of serious importance. She noted the names, categorizing passengers in her mind: the loud family, annoying; the early bird elderly couple, harmless; and the handful of high-value first-class executives, to be fawned over. That's when Mr. David Sterling approached the counter. David was everything the airport environment typically drained out of a person: calm, composed, and radiating an effortless sense of purpose. He was a tall man in his early 40s, dressed in a charcoal grey, flawlessly tailored suit, a suit that spoke volumes without shouting a single brand name. It was expensive, but more importantly, it was quietly powerful. His dark skin contrasted sharply with the white, crisp collar of his dress shirt. He carried a single, worn leather briefcase and a smartphone, from which he had already pulled up his electronic boarding pass. He stepped up to the podium, a polite, faint smile touching his lips. "Good morning, Agent Reynolds," David said, his voice a smooth, low baritone. "I believe I'm pre-board, Group 1. Just checking in." Karen didn't look up immediately. The pre-board call was still 3 minutes away, a detail she used as a justification for her delay. She finished her manifest scroll, a dramatic sigh escaping her lips. "Good morning," she finally said, her tone flat, her gaze finally lifting to scan the man before her. The quick, calculating sweep of her eyes dismissed the suit, the confidence, the quiet professionalism. What registered in her trained, biased mind was the singular image that countered the first-class status she expected to see associated with this name. "Pass, please," she instructed, not moving the scanner toward him. David held out his phone, the QR code bright on the screen. "It's right here." "I need to see your physical ID, sir," she replied, her voice hardening. It was a standard request, but the way she asked it, the slight upward tilt of her chin, suggested she expected his ID to somehow disqualify him. David didn't react. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, pulled out a black leather wallet, and smoothly presented his driver's license. David Sterling. Karen took the ID, holding it for a beat longer than necessary, comparing the photo to the man. She was looking for a crack, a discrepancy, a reason to justify the small knot of skepticism tightening in her stomach. She knew the flight was heavily booked with corporate travelers flying back to NYC after a major tech conference. She had, in her experience, dealt with people trying to sneak past the general boarding call, or worse, people with counterfeit or fraudulently upgraded passes. She felt a professional duty to verify extra carefully. She returned the ID with a deliberate flick of her wrist onto the counter. Now, the boarding pass. David placed his phone back on the scanner plate. "Group 1, sir?" she asked, a patronizing inflection on the "sir." "Yes. Seat 1A. It's a confirmed first-class reservation," David stated clearly, his smile now completely gone, replaced by a measured neutrality that was perhaps more unsettling than anger. Karen leaned closer to the monitor, her fingers clicking rapidly on the keyboard. 1A. Sterling. David, let me just confirm your payment method. Sometimes there are issues with third-party bookings, and we have to re-verify. This was a lie. She was stalling, fishing, trying to find an official lever to explain the cognitive dissonance between the man and his ticket. Seat 1A was the most expensive seat on the plane. It was the CEO's seat, the domain of the ultra-privileged. There won't be any issue with the payment method, Agent Reynolds. It was purchased directly by my office, David said, his voice still level. But the tone had shifted. It was no longer a polite request. It was a quiet correction, a warning of professional inconvenience. Karen ignored the tone. She saw the flash of the pass, a digital first-class ticket, but she did not move the scanner. She put her hands on the counter, palms down, leaning slightly over the podium. "Sir, this is a premium flight. I need to ask you to wait until I have verified all the priority passengers. We are not boarding yet. Please take a seat." "Agent Reynolds," David said, his eyes now locked onto hers. "I am standing right here. The boarding time is in 2 minutes. I am Group 1. My pass is ready. I simply need you to activate the scanner and complete the process." "I don't appreciate being rushed, sir," Karen snapped, the mask of procedure cracking to reveal the irritation beneath. "There's a line forming, and I need to manage the process." There was no line. Only 2 other people were tentatively approaching the counter. David took a deep breath, a signal that his patience had reached its finite end. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small, laminated corporate ID badge on a retractable lanyard, flipping it over so Karen could clearly read the text. Viridian Global Corp. The title was still obscured, but the company name, a massive, publicly traded tech solutions firm, was enough to make a ripple go through the few nearby travelers. "Agent Reynolds," David repeated, the lanyard held aloft. "With respect, I am a global traveler. My time is allocated very precisely. I need to be seated and prepare for a call upon takeoff. Scan my pass, now." Karen's face flushed. The corporate ID was an escalation, a subtle attempt to pull rank, and she instinctively resented it. Viridian Global Corp. She'd heard of them. Big hitters. But to her, he was just another demanding passenger trying to intimidate a service worker. "Sir, if you continue to try and bypass our established procedure, I will have to call security," she threatened, her voice rising, drawing the attention of more waiting passengers. "I am telling you to step aside. I will board my verified passengers in the correct order." David looked down at her, the height difference suddenly feeling like an insurmountable chasm between 2 worlds. He paused, looking around the gate area. He glanced specifically at his watch, a heavy executive timepiece, then down the terminal. He shook his head once, a gesture of profound disappointment, not anger, but a cold assessment of poor performance. He stepped back one single deliberate pace, pulled out his phone again, and placed a call. "Robert," he said into the phone, his voice dropping to a near whisper that still carried authority. "It's me. I'm at A4. A slight procedural delay with the gate agent. Nothing to worry about. Just hurry the board up, will you? I'd rather they see my presentation before they see this particular welcome committee." He hung up, the small clicking sound of the phone closing, echoing loudly in the tense silence. He didn't look back at Karen. He simply stood there, waiting, his posture saying more than any shouting ever could. Karen, meanwhile, was momentarily stunned by the phone call. Robert? Bored? She opened her mouth to snap a final command, to tell him she was calling security right now, but the words died in her throat. Because then, down the concourse, the first members of the Viridian Global Core executive team, the board of directors, came into view, moving with the efficient, tight formation of true power brokers, and they were heading directly for Gate A4. The sound preceded them, a confident, low thrum of expensive leather shoes on polished tile, overlaid with the rapid, measured cadence of corporate conversation. They weren't a crowd, they were a procession. 5 men and 2 women, all dressed in varying shades of steel grey, navy blue and black, their faces etched with the focused severity of people whose decisions impact thousands of employees and billions in assets. Agent Karen Reynolds watched them approach with a mounting sense of disorientation. She was used to executives, certainly, but this group radiated a collective gravity that felt different. The lead man, a towering figure with silver hair and an impeccably tailored Italian suit, was instantly recognizable from business news covers. Mr. Robert Vance, the long-standing CEO of Viridian Global Corp. Robert Vance was not just a CEO, he was a titan, a living legend in the tech industry. His name was synonymous with uncompromising efficiency and a notoriously zero-tolerance policy for unprofessional conduct, especially in public-facing situations. Karen instinctively smoothed down her uniform blouse and adjusted her smile, the practiced, slightly strained smile she reserved for genuine VIPs. She was already mentally preparing her apology for the slight delay in boarding. These were the passengers she was supposed to be fawning over, the ones who kept the airline's premium seats filled. As the group drew closer, they naturally converged on the lone, composed figure standing a step back from the podium, David Sterling. Robert Vance clapped a hearty hand onto David's shoulder, a gesture of familiarity and respect that immediately sent a jolt of alarm through Karen. "David, my apologies," Vance's voice boomed, cutting through the low murmur of the gate area. "We had a small delay with security regarding Eleanor's travel documents. Bloody mistake on the assistant's side. Did you get checked in, or are we going to be the first ones through the gate?" David Sterling turned to Robert, a faint, wry smirk playing on his lips. He glanced quickly back at Karen, who was frozen in place, her hand hovering near the scanner. "Robert, gentlemen. Eleanor. Alice," David greeted them, listing the names of the board members easily. "Welcome. I was just having a brief, enlightening discussion with Agent Reynolds here regarding the established procedures for pre-boarding. It seems there was a need for an extra level of verification for my particular ticket." David's voice was calm, almost conversational, but every word dropped like ice into the sudden silence around the podium. Robert Vance, sensing the shift in atmosphere, immediately scanned the scene. His CEO's gaze was sharp, moving from the pristine first-class ticket displayed on David's phone to the unused scanner, and finally resting on Karen's now pale face. "An extra level of verification, David?" Vance repeated, his tone instantly changing from jovial to frigid. "I arranged this booking personally, Agent. Seat 1A. It's a corporate first-class fare, paid in full weeks ago. What exactly needed verification? Karen, flustered and trapped, struggled to regain her footing. She had to pivot, and fast. Mr. Vance, good morning, sir. Welcome aboard Flight 577. I apologize for any confusion, Karen stammered, abandoning her professional tone for frantic deference. It wasn't the ticket, sir, of course not. It was procedural. We sometimes require passengers to present a physical pass or corporate ID to ensure we maintain order during the priority call. She hated the lie as it left her mouth, especially as David's corporate lanyard was still visible in his hand. Is that so? Robert Vance raised a silver eyebrow, his eyes narrowing. He looked at David, then back at Karen. David presented his digital pass, which is universally accepted, correct? And he presented his physical ID, which I saw you examine minutes ago. And as you can clearly see, he is traveling with the entire board of directors. Was there any doubt whatsoever, Agent, that this man was exactly who he said he was, and traveling in the class he paid for? Vance's question was rhetorical, a loaded corporate grenade. Karen felt the blood drain from her face as she saw the collective, professional disgust reflected in the faces of the board members, especially Eleanor Hayes, the chief legal officer, whose expression was a masterpiece of cold, professional scrutiny. No, sir, not at all, Karen insisted, pushing the scanner towards David frantically. I was just ensuring the system was ready before the official call. Please, Mr. Sterling, let me scan your pass now, right this way. David didn't move. He simply held his phone still, the first-class ticket glowing under the harsh airport light, forcing Karen to physically reach and press the scanner button herself. Beep. The scanner confirmed the booking with a decisive, loud chime. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. You are all set. Have a wonderful flight, Karen recited in a rush, her voice unnaturally high-pitched. David took his phone back. He didn't thank her. He didn't even acknowledge the completed transaction. Instead, he faced the CEO and the board. Gentlemen, Eleanor, Alice, David said, his gaze sweeping over his colleagues. Before we board and retreat to the sanctuary of first class, allow me to make 2 very quick points regarding what you just witnessed. He paused, ensuring every eye was fixed on him, and ensuring Karen, who had backed away slightly, was within earshot. First, I recognize that Agent Reynolds has a difficult job managing logistics. However, efficiency in any global operation, be it an airline or a tech firm, relies on 2 fundamental principles: adherence to established protocol and unbiased customer service. He let that sink in, his eyes briefly meeting Karen's. She looked away instantly, staring miserably at the screen, feigning interest in the upcoming boarding call. Second, and more importantly, David continued, stepping slightly closer to the board, speaking loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear the gravity in his voice. The incident you witnessed, where a gate agent exercised a clear, unwarranted pause in my processing despite all credentials being verified, a pause that only ended when the CEO of my company intervened, is unacceptable. It is a failure of service, and frankly, it is a clear display of the kind of casual, systemic bias that destroys confidence in a brand and creates a hostile environment. Robert Vance nodded slowly, his face grim. Duly noted, David. Absolutely unacceptable. Eleanor Alice, get the agent's full name and badge number. I want a formal complaint filed with the airline's corporate office immediately. This level of unprofessionalism is appalling. Eleanor Hayes, the legal officer, was already pulling out a notepad and pen, her dark eyes pinning Karen to the spot. Karen Reynolds, badge 749, Eleanor stated, reading the polished silver tag with an unnerving detachment. She didn't look at Karen, only transcribed the data onto her pad. The final devastating twist arrived when Robert Vance turned back to David, placing both hands firmly on his shoulders, smiling with genuine pride. "Well, David," Vance said, projecting his voice slightly, "I guess that's an excellent, albeit unpleasant, reminder of why we needed your leadership. Gentlemen and ladies, I am proud to formally introduce you all again, now that the formalities of the press conference are over, to Mr. David Sterling, your new Chief Strategy Officer and the Vice Chairman of the Board. The first item on his agenda, apparently, will be reviewing operational efficiency in public interactions." The sudden formal title announcement, Chief Strategy Officer and Vice Chairman of the Board, didn't just shock Karen, it physically hit her. Vice Chairman meant he wasn't just an executive. He was one of the most powerful people in the room, second only to Vance himself. The man she had condescendingly told to take a seat minutes ago held a position of unimaginable influence. The board members offered polite, low-key affirmations and handshakes. David gave a single professional nod. "Now shall we board, Mr. Vice Chairman?" Vance asked, gesturing toward the jetway. "After you, Robert," David replied, a quiet triumph in his eyes. He deliberately walked past Karen without making eye contact, following the CEO into the jetway. Karen was left alone behind the podium. The official boarding announcement was starting, but she barely heard it. The gate area, which moments ago was just an average part of her workday, had transformed into the scene of her professional execution. She looked down at the scanner, then at the empty jetway, realizing she hadn't just insulted a customer. She had publicly humiliated one of the most powerful incoming executives of one of the airline's largest corporate clients, directly in front of his entire board. The hard karma wasn't coming later. It had already landed. She slowly picked up the intercom microphone to begin the general boarding call, but her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. Karen finished the general boarding announcement in a shaky monotone, her gaze fixed on the endless stream of economy passengers. Each passenger who scanned their own pass seemed to look at her with an added layer of scrutiny, as if they, too, had heard the explosive exchange that had just occurred. The gate area, moments before her domain, now felt like a spotlight illuminating her monumental error. She could hear the low, intense conversation still emanating from the jetway. Although the door to the plane was shut, the proximity of the CEO and the new vice chairman of Viridian Global Corp was a physical weight pressing down on her. Suddenly, Eleanor Hayes, the chief legal officer, emerged from the jetway. Eleanor moved with the swift, predatory efficiency of a lawyer who knew she held all the facts and the moral high ground. She did not stop at the podium. She walked directly toward a quiet, unused corner near the window, dialing her phone. Karen watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, knowing exactly who Eleanor was calling. This wasn't just a threat of a complaint. This was an active, high-level corporate strike. Eleanor placed the call, speaking in a measured, calm voice that somehow sounded louder and more menacing than any shout. "Good morning. I need to speak to the highest available corporate liaison for Aegis Airlines immediately. My name is Eleanor Hayes, Chief Legal Officer for Viridian Global Corp. This is an urgent, top-level complaint regarding professional misconduct and systemic bias by one of your agents." She paused, listening to the person on the other end. "No, I am not calling customer service. I am calling to report an incident that took place 3 minutes ago at Gate A4, Phoenix Sky Harbor, involving your agent, Karen Reynolds, Badge 749, and Mr. David Sterling, Vice Chairman of Viridian Global. Yes, that David Sterling." Karen flinched. The use of her full name and badge number in connection with David Sterling's high-level title felt like the reading of an indictment. Eleanor continued, her voice clinical and precise. detailing the facts without emotion, which made the narrative all the more damning. The agent refused to scan Mr. Sterling's confirmed first-class boarding pass, Seat 1A, despite presenting all required identification, including his professional corporate badge. She exhibited a clear, unwarranted bias and refused service until the CEO of our company, Mr. Robert Vance, intervened. This occurred immediately preceding the boarding of the entire Viridian Board of Directors. It was a public, egregious failure of service that embarrassed our leadership and reflects poorly on your company's stated commitment to equal treatment. Eleanor paused again, clearly relaying specific instructions she was receiving from the cockpit via text message, probably from Vance or David himself. Mr. Sterling is deeply disappointed. Viridian Global spends millions annually with Aegis Airlines on corporate travel. Let me be clear. Unless this situation is addressed immediately and decisively, we will be forced to review the entirety of our multi-year corporate contract. I need confirmation of the agent's immediate removal from service and the instigation of a formal investigation within the next 30 minutes. Or I will be escalating this call to your legal department to discuss breach of contract terms related to guaranteed service standards. Eleanor hung up the phone. She didn't look at Karen. She simply walked back into the jetway, the quiet closing of the door sealing Karen's fate. For Karen, time seemed to slow down. She continued scanning boarding passes on autopilot, her mind racing. She tried to rationalize it. It was just a misunderstanding. I was just being thorough. They can't fire me over one small delay. It's their word against mine. But then, the corporate response arrived, less than 10 minutes after Eleanor's call. A man in a crisp white shirt, his face tight with controlled panic, sprinted toward the gate. This was Mark Sullivan, the airport operations manager, whom Karen knew primarily as a distant, sometimes irritating, figure of middle management. Mark had clearly been interrupted mid-meeting or mid-sandwich. He was sweating despite the airport's air conditioning. Mark stopped dead next to Karen, ignoring the line of passengers. "Reynolds! Karen Reynolds!" Mark hissed, pulling her away from the podium by the elbow, his grip tight and urgent. "Mark, what is it?" "I'm boarding the flight," Karen stammered, trying to maintain her composure in front of the line. "This is beyond boarding, Karen. You have just caused a potentially catastrophic corporate incident. Viridian Global is threatening to pull their entire contract. Do you understand the scope of that? Tens of millions in revenue." Mark pulled her further away, toward the wall. He pulled a phone away from his ear. He was on a conference call. He spoke directly into the phone, his voice strained. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. She is with me now. She is being removed from the gate immediately. I understand. Yes, I will personally escort her to HR." Mark hung up, his face set in stone. "Karen, you are immediately suspended, effective this second. Turn over your badge and your gate key. Now." Karen felt a sudden, profound dizziness. "Suspended?" "Mark, wait. I didn't do anything. I was following procedure. He was being impatient. He didn't look like first class. I just wanted to verify." The last words, the truth of her motivation, tumbled out before she could stop them. Mark Sullivan's eyes widened with genuine disgust. "He didn't look like first class." "Karen, you just admitted bias on a recorded line, and you think that helps? This isn't about an impatient traveler. This is about the vice chairman of our largest tech client being publicly mistreated in front of his board. They have been watching you from the plane, Karen. They specifically demanded your immediate suspension, pending a full, fast-tracked investigation. There is no appeal right now. Hand it over." His voice was firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Karen's hands trembled as she reached up, unpinning the silver name badge that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She unclipped the gate key from her belt. Her small, precious tools of authority were stripped away in seconds. Mark didn't look at her again. He turned to the remaining junior agent working the neighboring counter. "Johnson, take A4. Finish the boarding. No delays. And Johnson, if anyone asks about this incident, you saw nothing. Understand?" Mark then grabbed Karen by the arm, urging her toward the back office. The line of passengers stared, some with pity, most with detached curiosity. The woman who moments ago held the power to grant or deny access was now being marched away like a common criminal. As she was escorted past the food court, Karen risked one last, desperate look back at Gate A4. The Aegis Airlines plane, Flight 577, was still sitting there, silent and imposing. David Sterling, the man she had judged and dismissed, was now sitting in seat 1A, soaring in professional stature, while she was plummeting into unemployment. She realized the immediate, hard karma wasn't just losing her job. It was the chilling, public knowledge that her small act of bias had triggered an avalanche that endangered the careers of corporate leaders above her, all because she couldn't bring herself to scan a black man's boarding pass. The door to the operations office slammed shut behind her, cutting off the bright, bustling world of the airport. Karen Reynolds was officially off the clock, and perhaps permanently off the payroll. The operations office was a place Karen had visited hundreds of times, a cramped, windowless room reeking faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaning supplies. Today, however, it felt like an interrogation chamber. Mark Sullivan pushed her toward a hard plastic chair, and she sat, feeling numb, the reality of the situation beginning to settle like a block of ice in her chest. Mark didn't linger. He paced while shouting into his phone, his voice a tight coil of panic and frustration. "I need HR to clear a space. Now. Yes, I understand the severity. I just escorted the agent off the gate. She admitted to me, on the spot, that she questioned the passenger's validity because of his appearance. Yes, I have witnesses. The entire Viridian board saw it, Mr. Henderson." He hung up, slammed the phone down on the desk, and looked at Karen with a mixture of professional betrayal and personal disdain. "You have worked here for 15 years, Karen," Mark said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. 15 years of clean record. And you throw it all away because you couldn't process a first-class passenger without making a racist assumption? Do you have any idea how much leverage you just handed Viridian Global? They can demand anything now. Discounts, concessions, or worse, they can take their entire multi-million-dollar contract to Pacific Air, all because you couldn't press a button. Karen tried to defend herself, tears finally beginning to sting her eyes. "It wasn't just that, Mark. He was arrogant. He rushed me. I felt disrespected." "Disrespected?" Mark scoffed, running a hand through his already messy hair. "He's the vice chairman of a Fortune 50 company. You are a gate agent. Your job is to facilitate travel, not act as a judge and jury on who is worthy of first class. You created a hostile environment for a key client in front of his entire leadership team. This is beyond disrespect, Karen. This is grounds for immediate termination for gross misconduct." Before Karen could launch a fuller defense, the door opened and Patricia Jenkins entered. Patricia was the HR director for the airport hub, a calm, impeccably tailored woman whose demeanor was usually warm, but whose expression now was utterly devoid of empathy. She carried a legal pad and a pre-printed packet of termination forms. "Mark, thank you. You can step out now," Patricia instructed, her voice low and firm. Mark, visibly relieved, bolted from the room. Patricia sat across from Karen, opening the folder. The crisp sound of the paper was the only sound in the small office. "Karen," Patricia began, her tone strictly procedural, "we are conducting an internal investigation based on a formal complaint filed by Viridian Global Corporation, specifically Eleanor Hayes, their chief legal officer, witnessed by CEO Robert Vance and others. The complaint alleges professional misconduct, failure to adhere to boarding procedures, and discriminatory behavior against passenger David Sterling." Patricia didn't ask Karen if she understood. She simply stated the facts as they were now legally framed. "Your immediate suspension was enacted under Section 4, subsection C, of the Employee Handbook, pending this review. However, due to the critical nature of the complaint, the confirmation by the operations manager of your admitting to selective procedure based on appearance, and the potential impact on our multi-million-dollar corporate contract, this review has been expedited." Patricia pushed a document across the table. It was a formal summary of the incident, including a precise timeline: 10:47 a.m., refusal to scan; 10:50 a.m., arrival of the board; 10:52 a.m., forced compliance; 10:55 a.m., filing of the formal complaint; 11:05 a.m., immediate removal from duty. "We have already reviewed the gate camera footage of the incident," Patricia continued, her eyes locked onto Karen's. "The footage clearly shows Mr. Sterling presenting his pass and ID, and you intentionally delaying and arguing before finally processing him after the CEO intervened. It leaves no room for interpretation of the sequence of events." Karen felt a sickening lurch as she realized the cameras had recorded everything: her refusal, her delay, the expression on her face, the CEO's intervention, all preserved digitally. "I was trying to be diligent. I thought it might be fraud," Karen stammered, clutching at the last shred of plausible deniability. Patricia leaned forward, her expression hardening. "Fraudulent passes are flagged by the system, Karen. You were manually stalling the process. Furthermore, we have Mark's statement confirming your verbal admission that the passenger's appearance led to your undue scrutiny. That alone constitutes discriminatory conduct, violating our core policies." Patricia sighed, a sound of heavy corporate resignation. Aegis Airlines is in the business of transporting people, not judging them. When your personal biases put a major corporate relationship, a relationship worth more than your entire career here, at risk, the company must act decisively. She rotated the pre-printed termination packet toward Karen. "Karen Reynolds, effective immediately. Your employment with Aegis Airlines is terminated for gross professional misconduct and violation of non-discrimination policies." The word terminated hung in the air, heavy, final, absolute. 15 years of her life ended in a clinical sentence delivered by a woman she barely knew, all because of a 10-second delay and a snap judgment. Karen looked at the termination papers, the standard paragraphs about final pay, accrued vacation, and the legal language confirming she was fired for cause. This meant no eligibility for unemployment and a black mark on her professional record that would follow her wherever she applied next. This wasn't just losing a job. This was a professional execution. "But my pension," Karen whispered, the thought of her retirement security, now shattered, finally bringing on the full wave of despair. "My health insurance. You will receive information regarding Cobra and your final check in the mail," Patricia stated, her face unchanging. "As for your pension, you will need to speak to the retirement board, but termination for cause may impact certain benefits." Patricia stood up, signaling the conversation was over. "You need to collect your personal effects from your locker now, Karen. I will wait outside to escort you off the property. You are not permitted to engage with any staff or passengers. Your badge and access codes have already been deactivated." Karen sat motionless for a beat longer, feeling the profound, crushing weight of the hard karma. It wasn't just the job. It was the fact that the reason for her firing, her demonstrated bias, was now documented, confirmed, and triggered by a man who was, at that very moment, enjoying the luxury of first class, already conducting business calls with his board as their plane taxied toward the runway. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. As she walked toward the door, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the darkened window. The immaculate uniform, the perfect hair. It all looked ridiculous now, a costume for a part she no longer played. The power was gone. Her judgment had cost her everything. While Karen Reynolds was being escorted off airport property, stripped of her career and credentials, Flight 577 was accelerating down the runway. Inside the luxurious cabin of first class, the roar of the engines faded into a muted, powerful thrum, the soundtrack to high-stakes corporate maneuvering. David Sterling, seated in the coveted 1A, had already settled into work. His laptop was open, displaying the meticulously crafted presentation slides for the board meeting that would occupy the first 3 hours of the transcontinental flight. Next to him, CEO Robert Vance leaned back, a serious expression still clouding his features. The rest of the board, Eleanor Hayes, legal, Alice Chen, finance, and 3 other senior executives were arrayed across the first-class cabin, their tablets and papers spread out. The immediate tension of the airport incident had subsided, but its impact lingered like ozone after a lightning strike. Robert Vance turned to David, keeping his voice low but pointed. "David, I want to formally apologize on behalf of the Aegis Airline service experience. That was completely unacceptable. Eleanor has confirmed she spoke directly with their airport operations manager, and the agent was immediately removed from the gate and suspended. We expect confirmation of her termination before we land at JFK." David closed his laptop with a quiet click and met Vance's gaze. "Thank you, Robert. I appreciate the swift action from both our team and Aegis. It shows our commitment to addressing these issues decisively." He paused, a flicker of something deeply personal crossing his face. "But honestly, Robert, the termination of one gate agent isn't the core issue here. That incident was merely a symptom of a much larger, systemic problem that costs companies like ours and the airline far more than just bad press." Vance nodded gravely. "You're right. Let's make this the first, unplanned topic of the board meeting. I want you to address it, David. Use this. Turn it into the powerful lesson it is. This is why we hired you, to look beyond the balance sheet and see the true mechanics of success." The flight reached cruising altitude. Attendants, notably more deferential than usual, served drinks, and the cabin settled into the atmosphere of a high-altitude conference room. David stood up, commanding the attention of the cabin with an easy authority that completely belied his recent confrontation with the gate agent. "Good morning, everyone," David began, addressing the board. "Before we dive into the Q3 strategy review, I want to talk about what we just experienced. The gate agent, Karen Reynolds, demonstrated a failure of corporate culture and a significant operational risk. That interaction, which delayed a vice chairman of this corporation, cost Aegis Airlines a minimum of 2 things: the career of an employee and the necessity to review a lucrative contract." He walked slowly down the aisle, his presence filling the space. "But let's talk about the ripple effect on our company, Viridian Global. When I was delayed, and the board had to intervene, it disrupted our focus. It created unnecessary friction before a critical meeting. This is a subtle but tangible cost, the cost of disrespect and systemic bias." He looked directly at Alice Chen, the CFO. "Alice, you know our figures. We spend over $500,000 annually on recruitment and retention programs aimed at building an inclusive, high-performing workforce. If our potential leaders, our existing talent, specifically our diverse talent, believe they are going to face this kind of humiliation and prejudice simply walking through an airport, it undercuts every dollar we spend on inclusion and culture. Eleanor Hayes interjected, "David is correct. That sort of treatment leads to attrition risk, reputational damage, and a loss of confidence among our key employees. It signals a world where their value isn't automatically recognized." David pressed his point home. "Exactly. My point isn't about revenge or power, it's about professionalism. Karen Reynolds's refusal to scan my boarding pass wasn't personal. It was institutionalized. She had an image of what a first-class executive should look like, and I didn't fit it. This bias, when unchecked, makes people inefficient and toxic. It slows down service, creates confrontation, and ultimately, it hurts the bottom line." Robert Vance nodded approvingly. "So, David, what is the strategic takeaway from this unpleasantness?" "The strategic takeaway is this," David announced, his voice carrying the finality of a major corporate decision. "Viridian Global must make its commitment to diversity and professionalism non-negotiable, not just internally, but with all our vendors and partners. I propose we use this incident as the catalyst for a new vendor accountability and inclusion clause in all our major contracts." He detailed his plan. "This clause will stipulate that any publicly witnessed or formally reported instance of discrimination or gross professional bias against a Viridian employee must result in swift, documented disciplinary action by the vendor, or it triggers an immediate contract review and penalties. We will enforce our culture outside our four walls." The board members exchanged impressed glances. David hadn't just handled a personal slight. He had turned it into a massive strategic initiative that leveraged the company's buying power to enforce ethical standards, a true mark of a chief strategy officer. "Brilliant, David," Robert Vance smiled, a true, satisfied smile. "You've successfully turned a piece of bad customer service into a new lever for corporate governance. Board, do I hear a motion to approve the development of the Vendor Accountability and Inclusion Clause, effective immediately, using the Aegis Airlines incident as the defining case study?" The motion was passed unanimously. David Sterling had not just secured his position, he had defined the tenor of his entire tenure, making his first official act one of decisive leadership against the very bias that had just tried to stop him from getting on the plane. Meanwhile, back in Phoenix, a defeated Karen Reynolds was sitting on a plastic bench outside the airport's employee entrance, holding a small box of her personal belongings. She scrolled through job listings on her phone, the realization of her termination for cause hitting her with the force of a legal judgment. She was unemployable in her field, and the man she had dismissed was, at that very moment, using her public failure to enact a policy change that would financially punish her former employer. The karma was precise, professional, and devastating. The immediate shock of termination was followed by a crushing, prolonged silence. Karen returned to her modest Phoenix apartment, the small box of office mementos sitting ironically beside her mail, bills, junk mail, and a single official-looking envelope from the Aegis Airlines Human Resources Department. Inside was the formal termination letter, reiterating the grounds: gross professional misconduct and discriminatory practice, citing the formal complaint from Viridian Global's chief legal officer. The language was cold, legal, and final. It confirmed she would receive no severance pay, and that her termination for cause disqualified her from collecting unemployment benefits in the state, pending a potential appeal, a process that HR had kindly informed her would be long, costly, and unwinnable given the high-profile nature of the complaint. This was the start of the hard karma, taking a deeply personal, financial toll. Karen was a single woman in her late 40s. Her airport job hadn't made her rich, but the stable salary, the decent benefits, and the certainty of her pension had been the foundation of her life. She had a mortgage on her apartment, a modest car payment, and a standard amount of credit card debt, all manageable when the bi-weekly paycheck arrived. Now, the foundation had vanished. Within 2 weeks, the financial dominoes began to fall. 1. Job search. Dead end. Karen's first desperate attempts to find similar work at other airlines or airport service companies were immediately thwarted. In the tight-knit, heavily regulated industry of commercial aviation, a termination for gross misconduct is a bright red flag. Every job application that asked for reason for leaving became a trap. Her former manager, Mark Sullivan, when contacted for a standard employment verification, provided only the cold, legally necessary facts. Employed from 2008 to 2023, terminated for cause due to policy violation. No one in the industry would touch her. Her resume, once a symbol of stability, was now tainted. 2. The pension loss. Her termination for cause, under the severe policy violation clause, significantly impacted her accumulated pension benefits. She hadn't reached the full vesting period under the most generous terms, and a large portion of her employer-matched contributions was forfeited. She had banked on that pension for her security. Now it was a fraction of what she expected, locking her into the reality of working low-wage, non-career jobs for the foreseeable future. 3. Debt and dunning. As the weeks turned into months, and the low-paying retail jobs she managed to find barely covered her monthly expenses, her debts became unmanageable. The car payment became late, the minimum payments on her credit cards lagged, and the mortgage, the largest bill, became an unbearable source of stress. She started receiving the dreaded dunning letters and phone calls, harassing her at her new minimum wage job. The story, however, did not stay confined to the corporate offices of Aegis Airlines and Viridian Global. Robert Vance and David Sterling, in their successful push for the new Vendor Accountability and Inclusion Clause, used the incident as a case study in an investor call and a subsequent press release. While Aegis Airlines' name was initially kept under wraps, the highly public corporate drama surrounding the removal of a high-ranking executive's business partner quickly became fodder for business reporters. One tenacious local investigative reporter in Phoenix, Sarah Kempler, from the Arizona Business Observer, connected the dots. She obtained the details of the formal complaint filed by Eleanor Hayes, found the termination notice filed with the state, minus the name, but matching the event, and finally located Karen Reynolds' identity through public records associated with her employee parking pass. Sarah Kempler didn't run a story about race. She ran a story about the intersection of corporate power and professionalism. The headline was devastatingly precise. $3 billion executive's first act, firing the gate agent who questioned his first-class ticket. The article didn't use David Sterling's name in a negative light. It portrayed him as a decisive leader who took immediate, necessary action against clear bias that threatened his corporate culture. For Karen, the public exposure was the ultimate, humiliating blow of the hard karma. Suddenly, she wasn't just an anonymous former employee. She was the gate agent. Her neighbors looked at her differently. Her few remaining friends started making excuses not to see her. The judgment she had so quickly and wrongly cast on David Sterling was now being cast 1,000-fold upon her. Her moment of small, petty authority had metastasized into professional ostracization and public shaming. 6 months after the incident, Karen was working the graveyard shift at a convenience store a few miles from the airport, a job she took out of sheer desperation. One rainy Tuesday morning, as the sun began to rise, an older gentleman in a familiar charcoal suit walked in to buy coffee. It was Robert Vance, the CEO of Viridian Global, back in town for another quarterly visit, having landed on an early morning private jet. He had an uncanny memory for faces, and he recognized her instantly. Karen's stomach dropped. She stood behind the counter, her uniform, a cheap polyester polo, a miserable contrast to the elegant uniform she once wore. Vance paused, took his coffee, and then approached the counter. He didn't gloat. His expression was one of profound, detached pity, recognizing a complete reversal of fortune. "Good morning, Miss Reynolds," Vance said, his voice quiet. He laid a $20 bill down for a $3 coffee. Karen could barely whisper, "Good morning, sir." Vance didn't take his change. He simply looked at her, his eyes serious. "I trust you understand now, Miss Reynolds, that the only person who sets the standard for how high a professional can fly is the professional themselves." Mr. Sterling earned his seat. "You gave yours away." He turned and left. The $17 change lay on the counter. It was a final, stark reminder of her lost income, her lost status, and the cost of the prejudice she had allowed to govern her professional judgment. Karen didn't move to pick up the money. She didn't want the charity. She only watched as Robert Vance climbed into a waiting, immaculate black sedan. The car drove off, symbolizing the world of high-powered efficiency and merit she had once served, and the world she had barred herself from forever, all because she couldn't bring herself to scan a boarding pass. Her life was now a scramble for survival, the quiet, daily grind of hard karma replacing the stability of her former life. A year had passed since the incident at Gate A4. For Karen Reynolds, it had been a year of professional exile and financial struggle. For David Sterling, it had been a period of soaring success, validation, and immense influence. The vendor accountability and inclusion clause, which David had swiftly championed, was now a standard element in all of Viridian Global's multi-million-dollar contracts, transforming corporate governance standards across the industry. David was lauded in business journals not just for his strategy, but for his ethical leadership. His profile was elevated. His presence at corporate events was a guarantee of prestige. 6 months after Robert Vance's quiet encounter with Karen at the convenience store, David was named Chief Strategy Officer of the Year by a prestigious national business publication. The award was presented at a black-tie gala in New York City. In a televised interview immediately following the ceremony, the reporter, Michael Hawthorne, brought up the infamous Phoenix incident, the case that launched the Vendor Accountability Clause. "Mr. Sterling," Hawthorne began, holding a microphone out. "A year ago, your tenure began with a public controversy, the incident in Phoenix involving the gate agent who delayed your boarding. You leveraged that moment into a major policy change. How do you look back on that confrontation now?" David, gleaming in a tuxedo, held the heavy crystal award in his hand. He spoke calmly, without bitterness, but with the measured clarity of a true executive. "Michael, I look back on that day not as a moment of confrontation, but as a moment of clarity. It wasn't about the inconvenience to me personally. It was about recognizing a systemic failure. When a company, particularly one in the service sector, allows its employees to operate with personal bias, it creates inefficiency and destroys value. It sends a message that merit and achievement are secondary to arbitrary judgment." He paused, glancing directly into the camera. The gate agent, Ms. Reynolds, made a snap judgment based on appearance that day. She saw a black man in a suit and decided he must be an anomaly or a fraud. That decision cost her her career. severely damaged her employer's relationship with a key client, and ultimately forced the industry to look at its own implicit biases. David's voice softened slightly, adopting a tone of genuine reflection. That is the true lesson of that day. Unchecked bias is not just unethical. It is profoundly bad business. It's a self-inflicted wound. My goal was not to punish Ms. Reynolds, but to ensure that the environment that empowered her mistake could not threaten the progress and opportunity of others. He raised the Crystal Award. This award, in many ways, is a testament to the fact that when you enforce fairness and professionalism rigorously, you empower merit, and merit always wins. Back in Phoenix, Karen Reynolds was taking the bus home from her job as a cleaner for a suburban office building, a job that required no background check and paid barely above minimum wage. She was exhausted, her hands raw from abrasive cleaners, her uniform perpetually stained. On the bus, a passenger across the aisle was watching the national business news on a small tablet. Karen couldn't help but look, and there he was, David Sterling, illuminated, successful, articulate, holding a trophy, talking about her. She didn't hear the whole interview, but she caught the devastating final words. Ensure that the environment that empowered her mistake could not threaten the progress and opportunity of others. That was the final blow of the karma. It wasn't just that she had lost everything. It was that her failure had become the foundation of someone else's enduring success. Her momentary, petty exercise of power had resulted in her total professional defeat and had fueled David Sterling's rise into the stratosphere of American corporate leadership, validating his worth to the world while definitively invalidating hers. Karen quickly looked away, staring out the dirty bus window. The airport, a sprawling complex of lights and metallic towers, was visible in the distance. She thought back to that morning at Gate A4, the 2 minutes of stubborn refusal, the power trip. She realized with a deep, sickening certainty that she had been given a choice: acknowledge the dignity of the man before her and simply do her job, or uphold a bias that had no place in the professional world. She chose the bias, and in doing so, she became the living example of the very thing David Sterling was now successfully eradicating from corporate culture. She had tried to hold him back for 2 minutes. He had secured her downfall for life. The bus rattled on, carrying her away from the lights of opportunity and toward the quiet, inescapable reality of her hard-won karma. The story was complete. The arrogance, the twist, the judgment, and the devastating, long-tail consequences of prejudice in a high-stakes world. The story of Agent Karen Reynolds and Vice Chairman David Sterling isn't just a tale of 2 minutes at a gate. It's a harsh lesson in the true cost of unchecked bias. Karen believed her uniform gave her the right to judge, but she underestimated the power of the man she judged, a man whose composure masked billion-dollar influence. Her refusal was not a minor delay. It was a professional suicide note, signed in front of the CIO and the entire board. David Sterling didn't seek revenge. He sought justice and strategic improvement, turning one woman's prejudice into a policy that elevates corporate integrity. Hard karma isn't always instant. Sometimes it's the quiet, long-term erosion of your life, making you an example for the world. If this story of corporate drama, bias, and definitive consequence resonated with you, hit the like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this lesson about professional conduct. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into real-life dramas and powerful life lessons. What choice would you have made at Gate A4? Let us know in the comments below.